Coming up, an interview with Kwame Ture, 1960s chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also called SNCC. Mr. Ture, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael, is a leader of the Black Power movement. During the 1960s, SNCC led voter registration efforts in the South and rural areas of the U.S. But first, this speech by him from a 1966 rally in Los Angeles.
I'm tired of Negro leaders telling us how to be nonviolent without teaching us how to be nonviolent among each other. That's right. So that is where we need it most. We need to begin to understand, love, and respect each other first. Our people ought to teach us nonviolence among ourselves, and that's where it stops. That's where it stops. Once we're together, ain't nobody gonna mess with us. That's the one thing we've got to understand. Now, all those people running around here talking about the rebellions didn't do no good, the rebellions didn't do this, didn't do that. The rebellions did one good thing for this country. It let white America know that if they think they're going to play Nazis, black people are not Jews. And that means, then, that we must move to a position where we begin to bring those factors together. We are the only people in this country who have to protect ourselves against our protectors. We are the only people that do that. We have to get community alert patrols, not to patrol our neighborhoods, but to patrol the policemen. And the only reason we do that is because we are black. The only reason they oppress us is because we are black, not because we're stupid, lazy, eat watermelon, and got good rhythm. But because we are black. And that's what we must begin to understand. We cannot accept the lies that this country has told to us and to everybody else. We must begin to tell the truth to each other and move from there. This country told us that if you work hard, if you sweat, that you would succeed. If that were true, black people would own this country, lock, stock, and barrel. Because we are the hardest working people in this country. And our trouble has been that we've cared more for this country than we have for ourselves. And it is time that we begin to think about us. That's what we need to do. We have sent our mothers to leave us as babies and go take care of Miss Ann babies first before they take care of us. We have sent our fathers off to fight wars to help Polish Americans fight Hitler, and when they get back home, those same Poles fight us in Cicero. We got to take care of us. We've got to begin to care about us. Because there's nobody in this country that cares about us. The only protection we have is each other. That is all. That is all. And the minute we begin to recognize that, then we move on a true path for our liberation. Now we begin to let this country know that if they shoot a black man walking down a Mississippi highway with a Bible in his hand, if they shoot a black man taking his wife to the hospital in West Los Angeles, they're not dealing with one black man, but they're dealing with 40 million black Americans.
Now, an interview with Kwame Ture conducted recently in Harlem, New York. Mr. Ture is in the United States for medical treatment. Now 56, he's battling prostate cancer.
Ture, let me start with the basic questions about your health. We keep reading that you're a sick man. How sick are you?
I'm fairly sick. I have cancer, which started in the prostate. It's metastasized, it's spread to the bones, which gives excruciating pains. And on a Gleason scale of 10, I have a 7. So it's a killer cancer.
When you have something like that, what's it do to your mind?
Well, it depends actually upon your frame of mind. All my life, death and life has gone hand in hand, So, as a matter of fact, just to be brutally humorous, I should have been dead a long time ago. So, Death in life doesn't do anything. All it does is makes you perhaps prioritize your life a little bit more precisely than you would have haphazardly.
And what do you do for it? Physically, I mean, you go to the hospital a lot, you have to have...
Yeah, well, you know, you take the general treatment, whatever they can give you, but I'm about maybe just surpassed all of the treatments that, you know, they can give to get rid of the pains, you know.
And what are you doing in New York now?
I'm doing some work for the All African People's Revolutionary Party, doing some recruitment work to organize, and then I should return home to Africa by the end of this month.
Where is home?
It's in Guinea, in West Africa.
And how long have you lived there?
30 years almost, 29. Mm-hmm.
Are you still an American citizen?
I carry an American passport, yeah.
And are you a Guinea citizen?
I carry a Guinean passport, yes.
How American do you feel after 56 years?
Well, you know, I'm not your typical person. You know, I wasn't born in America.
Where were you born?
I was born in the Caribbean, in Trinidad, and so I spent my early childhood up to about 10, 11 there. So, and I spent in America no more than 15 or 16 years before I moved to Africa. So it's kind of hard, just quantitatively speaking, to see it in that sense. There's no question now that America has had a very strong influence upon my life. That one cannot be denied. Yeah.
What do you think's happened to America since you were an activist?
Oh, well, I'm still an activist, but I think America's become more ripe for evolution. The people have become more conscious. And even the right wing are becoming more aware of who their real oppressors are, you know, and begin to see that we Africans, we have no power, we cannot do anything, you know, and they're beginning now finally to wake up and see that they must fight the power, not the powerless. So I think our conditions are more ripe for revolution, people are more conscious, women are more conscious, the environment movement is more conscious. In every area you will see new domains of struggle which you had not even thought about in the 60s.
You gave a speech at the University of Massachusetts in '97, and I want to quote back to you what you said and have you talk more about this. Practically every profound change in this country since the 60s is a result of the mass movements of Africans in this country. Can you give us an example?
Oh, let me give you a real funny one. Some years ago, maybe about 10, 15 years ago, our party there committed me to go to do a recruitment drive at the Mormon school. Is that in Iowa? Salt Lake
City, Utah.
Utah. And of course, when I first saw it, I said, "Who did this?" You know, I said, "Well, you know, I'm a disciplined, organized man. Once the organization, you know, gives orders, as long as they're not contrary to humanity, I can follow them, you know." And it's all right. So I went, and of course, at that school, there must have been about 8 African students, and all of them came to the airport to meet me. None of them wanted my feet to touch the ground, you know, and they're just fussing and bubbling. Nobody ever comes here, you know. You're the only one. Nobody thinks about us, all right. So they take me to their hotel, campus hotel, where guests stay. And behind the desk is a white college student there who's working student. And he has long hair, you know. And he sees them making all this fuss over me, you know. Even they don't even want me to sign my name when it's time to sign. So finally when I have to sign the card at the hotel, I come in. He said, "Well, who are you anyway?" I looked at him, I said, "Well, why are they making all this fuss over you?" I looked at him, I said, "You see that long hair you're wearing? You have to thank me." Of course, if I came in the 60s, you'd have a crew cut and bobby socks. You know, just the conformity in which America had lived in the 60s was completely broken open. When you see people wearing simple things as dungaree suits, you know, just in terms of a dress, you know, all this was part of the dress code that was thoroughly broken down in the 60s. I mean, just on that level. The 60s have profoundly touched the country. Of course, the powers that be tried to make it appear as if it had no profound effect upon the country, but the effect has been in every aspect of life in America, been touched. This is a golfer, the handicapped golfer, who just was talking about a case. When I saw that case, he was talking, you know, as an individual. I said, "Oh, this is Mrs. Rosa Parks' victory."
Why Rosa Parks' victory?
Because once you start against discrimination, where are you going to stop? You have to get rid of all discrimination that's natural. So once you start off and you agree that discrimination based on natural selection, the way a person is born or whatever, is unjust, then it goes all the way. Because it was, matter of fact, it was after that that you began to see the handicaps on the streets. Before that, the handicaps were afraid to go out on the streets. They had no access routes for them, you know. But since the 60s, even the handicapped in this country have become conscious and have protested and have changed the conditions of their very life. Yeah.
What's happened to racism in America?
It's still strong. It's very strong. It's become more subtle. But its subtleties, of course, are being exposed to more and more, and by none other than the bourgeoisie themselves, who, they call it, have reached the ceiling, you know. So it's become more vicious, there's no question about it, in its subtleties, and the people are more determined to fight it in every aspect.
If you were to go back in the 60s and pick the moment when you were the most well-known in the United States, or the moment when you had reached your peak of I don't know, either fame or of value to the revolution, when would that have been?
Today. Because every day, of course, we learn more. People get carried away with the media and publicity. But actually, some of the best work done has never been recorded on the cameras or in the history books. And every day we become, if we're determined, we become more knowledgeable and more experienced, which I have and become every day. So every day I am of more value than the day before. But if we were to look back to be more precise on your question, if we were to look back, probably, you know, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, when I served as chair, gave two slogans to this country. One was, "Hell no, we won't go," and the other one was Black Power. Of course, very few people look at the "Hell no, we won't go." But "Hell no, we won't go's" job was to smash the draft, which it did. Black Power, of course, has not been arrived at. We don't have Black Power yet, and have some way to go before we get to arrive at Black Power. Some people get confused and think that individual African electoral politicians equals Black Power. I don't know how they come to that conclusion with, you can have an African mayor in New York and the conditions of the African masses not only do not change, but in fact can become worse.
Go back to that, "Hell no, we won't go." Did you invent that?
Well, it came out of SNCC, yes, when I was chair. Mm-hmm.
Do you remember the moment when you invented that particular
I
slogan?
remember we said it, yes. It was when they'd arrested me here in Staten Island in New York, because of refusal to get drafted. And they held me there, I think, overnight, or maybe 72 hours, I can't remember. And then when, upon my release, the press said, "Are you going?" "Hell no, I won't go. No intention of going to Vietnam."
How much did that take off around the country?
It went like wildfire. You know, I remember as a young representative of SNCC going to a peace meeting. You had all these big people that I read about in books, you know, Dave Dillinger, you know, Spock, you know, I mean, all these big people, you know, Am Braden, you know, these he's heavyweights, you know. And I'm a little student, I'm taking copious notes, and at the end of the meeting, one of the people said, "Oh, but the representative of SNCC is here, and they've said absolutely nothing." So I said, "Oh, I'm sorry." I said, "Oh, my organization just came to tell you that we're going to smash the draft." And I sat back down. They said, "No, you can't do that." I said, "I'm sorry, I'm just telling you what my organization told me to tell you." And I sat back down. That was their attitude. But, of course, we persisted and we pursued, and the "Hell no" certainly did smash the draft. Not only that, it caused a lot of a disruption of the draft machinery in the country, with youth, white youth, building up real resistance against the draft. We wanted to move them from protest to resistance, and "Hell no," it was a slogan, effectively did move from protest to resistance. You know, we're not protesting the war, we're just not going.
Why didn't you think you should go?
To the war in Vietnam? There was absolutely no reason for me to go. I mean, especially me. From the time I was 19 years old, I was tortured, I was imprisoned, I was beaten in the South, just for trying to give the right to vote to Africans there. So there was no way in the world that I, who am beaten in Mississippi for trying to get the right to vote, is going to go to Vietnam and give somebody else the right to vote with a gun by those who would deny me the right to vote. I mean, the logic, it just wasn't possible. There's no way you couldn't see out of it. There was no way. It was clear. If I can't vote in Mississippi, how am I going to go in Vietnam and fight? Give me a gun in Mississippi, get my vote here, then we'll see about Vietnam.
What happened? Were you drafted at any time?
Yeah, I refused to go.
So what happened? Did you go to jail?
They said that when they classified me, they give you that mentally unstable, mentally insecure. So that was crazy in one word or another. I forgot what the classification was, but they gave me a crazy classification, so that was crazy. Well, there's pleasure sure in being mad, which none but the madman knows.
Black Power came at what moment? The slogan?
The slogan came in Mississippi on the March to Mississippi. And it's interesting to note that the Africans in this country had went from Freedom Now in 1963 on the March on Washington to Black Power in 1966 on the March on Mississippi. In 3 short years, the consciousness had leaped. Black Power, of course, had to come. Dr. Martin Luther King occupied the center of the stage, which he should. There's no question about that. But there were areas where, in fact, where there was progress, in fact, those areas were not making progress anymore. For example, where to arouse the people and say freedom now would stir them. Once they got up and saw all the problems before them, saying freedom now again doesn't exactly stir them. You have to be a little bit more precise as you go along and struggle. And one of the reasons Black Power came was to begin to bring more precision to the movement. It came to clarify, number one, that though Dr. King was loved, admired, and respected by all of us, nonviolence was a principle for him, but for him alone. And of course, people who don't study the struggle seriously didn't understand this, but of course I knew Dr. Martin Luther King and I followed him very closely, and as early as 1955, if my memory serves me correctly, I think he recounts it in Stride Towards Freedom in the book, when his house was dynamited. You know, after his house was dynamited, he missed death by about this much. And the African community in Montgomery was steaming, but you know, Dr. King has a silver tongue. He can talk the sweet out of honey, and they want to pick up guns. Dr. King, he's poured out his silver tongue, calmed them down, told them no, wasn't need for retaliation. And then there was discussion about whether or not he had a gun in the house, and he refused to keep a gun in the house. But the Montgomery Improvement Association, the organization which he headed at that time, imposed bodyguards at his house 24 hours. And he, King, had to accept it. So once this was done, he was clearly saying, all right, me, King, I understand this is my principle, but this is me, King, as an individual. For the rest of my community, they have not arrived there at this point. Some more work here and there, et cetera, but at least they're not there now.
When did you develop the Black Power salute?
No, not really. The Black Power slogan's been around for some time. Richard Wright has a book entitled Black Power, which he dedicated to Kwame Nkrumah. Adam Clayton Powell, congressman of New York, was fond of not only saying Black Power, but he used to say audacious Black Power. So it wasn't anything new. It was just the right time at a mass movement to launch the right slogan. That's all.
What was the reaction when you started using Black Power and the salute in this country?
Well, of course, the reaction was overwhelming. But for me, I expected, of course, the press. We knew what the reaction would be there. But what was overwhelming was the response of the masses. We really didn't know that we would touch such a responsive chord among the mass of the people with the slogan, which, of course, it did at that time. Yeah. So I was myself individually just overwhelmed by the reaction, the response, and the enthusiasm that was generated around the slogan. I mean, it sent people in 1,000 different directions, doing 1,000 different things, trying to benefit the community.
By the way, where are we sitting?
We're sitting in Harlem on Convent Avenue. This is the apartment of a sister of mine, Sister Geraldine Price, who is a professor at City College, which is not too far from here. This is the middle of Harlem.
And where were you growing up in this area?
I grew up in the lower Bronx, Stebbins Avenue, right across the bridge as a young man.
What year did you come to the United States?
I think 51 or 52.
Why?
My mother and father had been to the United States. My mother came to the United States, left my father because she had some problems with my paternal aunts within the same house she had to live. So her mother was here in America, so she came. And my father, feeling love beats in his heart, stowed away on a ship to come to America to join my mother. And that's how we ended up here with my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, who was raising us. When she passed away, then we were brought to America, my sisters and myself.
How many in the family besides you?
I have 4 sisters. I'm the only boy. I'm the second.
And where are the sisters?
One's in New York here, 2 are in Florida with my mother, and one's in Mississippi.
And what did your parents do for a living?
My father was a carpenter. My mother raised a family, took care of a house, and when my father died, worked as a waitress on an ocean liner.
What year did your dad die?
61 or 62.
When you think of your parents, each one of them, what did they give you?
My father gave me honesty. My father was aggressively honest. And my mother gave me my fighting instincts. My mother looks for confrontation.
Why?
I guess it's her nature.
And when did you first notice this in her?
A long time ago. Not her nature, it's just, I guess, the conditions under which she grew up and the insults which she refused to take. Fighting is that was very early. My mother's fighting instincts were recognized very early, along with my father's honesty.
What do you first remember when you came to this country and you lived in the Bronx at age 10 or 11?
The first thing I remember was that as a child in Trinidad, when the moon was full and bright, we used to love it to go outside in the yard and play. And when I came to America in Stebbins Avenue, I couldn't see the moon in the apartment building where we lived. So, where's the moon? Want to go outside and play? So my biggest, I couldn't see the moon. It was unbelievable. That's where I started, from not seeing the moon to concrete jungle, I guess, was where I was transferred to, in every sense of the word.
Did you lack things as a kid? Did money
Not really, no, not really. We were taught anyway not to want what you couldn't have. And that philosophy was embedded in us early in life. Enough so I think it had an effect on most of us that we never wanted what we could not have.
What were your high school years like?
My high school years were very interesting. They quickened my political consciousness. I attended the Bronx High School of Science here, and at that time, my name being Carmichael, sat close to a man by the name of Dennis, who happened to have been Eugene Dennis, the son of Eugene Dennis of the Communist Party of the USA. And so through him, and we also went out to play on the soccer team together. We were co-captains in our senior year. Developed very strong friendship and also a lot of political contacts and political discipline and study of Marxism and Leninism. So I quickened my political consciousness.
Is he still here with us?
I don't know where Dennis is. I'm trying to track him down in years. We keep trying. But he's somewhere around. I keep slipping and sliding, missing him here and there.
What did it mean then to be a communist?
Why, you're talking about 1956, 57.
Right.
What? If you walk up picket line, you're a communist. Yeah, they kill you, to be a communist. Even at the enlightened Bronx High School of Science, we'd have big fights just to have rallies outside of the school for the right of someone from the Socialist Party or the Communist Party to speak. Yeah, so, no, it was, really, these Africans have broken America wide open from its conformity. There was no, political dissent on the question. Of course, it was terrible.
What's the definition of a communist 1956-57 style, in your opinion?
Well, of course, the same thing it is for me. Communism is nothing other than a scientific economic system whose principle is from each according to their ability to each according to their need, which is a governing principle. And of course, you must just make your governing structures to ensure that this principle is carried forth. So that's what it's ever meant to me, because I've known it, I've studied it. Unfortunately, in America at that time, communism meant anybody you didn't like or didn't agree with for whatever reason.
When was the first time you got attention yourself for being an activist? High school or college?
No, probably in college, in that sense, probably in college, yeah.
And you went where?
Well, of course, by the time I was a freshman, I already joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, so we were doing forays into the South, doing vacations. We did work in Virginia. We did work on Route 40 in Maryland, because, you know, Washington, D.C., to get into it, you have to go either through Maryland or Virginia. And at the time I was a student at Howard University, both states were segregated. So no matter how I went to school, I had to go through segregated states to arrive there. So we took on these states, and a man by the name of Julius Hobson, who's dead now, but who was then the Congress of Racial Equality Director in Washington, D.C., also trained us in a northern struggle, if you will. So being technically in the north in Washington, D.C., and touching the south, Maryland and Virginia, gave me and those of us who were in a nonviolent action group at Howard an opportunity to see northern and southern struggle being waged at the same time, and how to combine them.
Why did you choose Howard?
Well, it's very funny. As a senior at Bronx High School of Science, there was a demonstration against HUAC, House of Un-American Activities Committee in Washington, D.C., in my senior year, May of 1960. And, of course, I had a special hatred for HUAC for its treatment of Paul Robeson. Of course, I had hatred, but this was even special hatred for what they were doing to Paul Robeson. And any chance, of course, to avenge HUAC would be gladly seized upon, especially as a young man. So when they said there would be this picket line, I was very enthusiastic. I knew there wouldn't be many Africans on the picket line because, you know, it's communist and socialist groups in America. But I was very surprised when I arrived in Washington, D.C., to find a large contingent of Africans who were marching under the Socialist Party in Washington, D.C. So, of course, I immediately ran up to them. You with the Socialist Party? They said, no, no, we would SNCC, you know, but we're against HUAC too. They're bothering, so we're picketing. I said, y'all picket HUAC? Yeah. Y'all with SNCC? They said, yeah, we would NAG, and they gave me the organization on campus and contacts. And I'd been thinking about going to Howard, but that clinched it. I couldn't wait to get to Howard.
And how long did you spend at Howard?
It's 4 years. I did a bachelor's degree in philosophy.
And what were you studying? What kind of philosophy?
Philosophy, political philosophy, and I think I had a double major in sociology and history. Yeah.
And as you look back on the philosophers that you liked, who would you name?
The ones I like, of course, would be the materialists, you know, Marx, of course, Engels, the others who were idealists just try to make confusion for people, and they just try to reflect the thinking of the ruling classes at any given time and make it appear as if that is the status quo.
In the speech you gave at Amherst, at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, last year, you talk about primary sources, and you say that America is arrogant, and that you kept challenging the students to go to primary sources. Talk more about that. What do you mean by that?
Well, we gave an example, and it's a true example. You can do it even in your, what they call random telephone surveys. I'm sure that if you ask the people in America, at least 90% of the people in America over 15 years of age have heard of Adolf Hitler. I'm certain, at this time. And I'm sure if you ask all of these who've heard of Adolf Hitler, if they have an opinion about him, I'm certain that they all do. And if you ask them how many of them has read one book by Hitler or one article by Hitler, I'm sure less than 2%. So these people form their opinions about a great man like Adolf Hitler, wickedly great, badly great, a man who affected the world anyway, so there must be something there. And without even reading him. They just read what's been passed down to them. It's just like if, you know, Lamb writes that Hitler's a bad man, and I call my reader, Hitler's a bad man. All right, well, Hitler's a bad man, you get an A. You know, but I can read just as well as Lamb. If I can read Lamb, I can read Hitler. So I figure it's better to send us to primary sources. Of course, as a philosophy student, we were urged to go to primary sources. I couldn't accept what someone said about Karl Marx after reading myself. I wouldn't accept what someone said about Kwame Nkrumah. I'd read it myself. I wouldn't accept what someone said about Ture. I'd read it myself. You know, about Mao Zedong. I'd read them myself. So I would not accept what anyone said about Adolf Hitler, about anyone. I can read, and if I can read them, I can read Hitler.
Where would we go to find the primary source on Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael?
Well, you can find them in, there's some sources there in library and documentation.
But have you archived the speeches you've given?
They're archived, and we're also doing a book now which social pressure has imposed upon us because death is lingering above our heads. And we're working on completing that book.
How long do you think you'll live?
I don't know, but...
What do the doctors say?
Well, the doctors keep saying they're buying time. They gave me 2 years ago about 5 months, you know, so doesn't make any difference to me. It's not, as Martin Luther King would say, it's not how long you live, but the quality of life that you live. And,
what is the quality of your life now?
Well, the one thing that we are most proud of and grateful of is that we've always carried our people's struggle with dignity, with integrity. We've never compromised. We've never lied to anyone. So these are the things for which we are proud and things which we would want to leave as legacies.
How do you afford to live these days?
Oh, no. When I was a young man working for SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Crime Committee, and had a college degree, I worked for $9 and some cents a week, wasn't it? If you got it. And half the time you didn't get it. So I have really functioned all my life as a guerrilla. I can live off the people. I can travel around the world without a penny in my pocket, and I will be fed and I will be housed everywhere I go, I'm certain of that.
Do you have medical insurance?
No, I have no medical insurance at all.
So how do you pay your medical bills?
Well, I'm a poor man, so Medicaid will pay, this one will pay, and I have a lot of people like Dr. Bill Hall, who's been a good friend, and they've put together a medical fund to help with extra medical expenses.
Now, recently we covered an event that you didn't do it. Somebody did it for you in Washington.
That's again, Dr. Bill Hall helped to organize that with Karen Spellman, exactly.
And did they raise money for you there?
They did raise some money there, yes. I don't know how much they raised. That's not my department.
So if people want to contribute to your health
fund,
there is one.
There is one. There's the medical fund it's called the Kwame Ture Medical Fund, and the address will be given to you. And
okay. Yeah, I've got a copy of the address here. We'll put it on the screen if people want to see it. But how much does it cost to keep you medically treated?
Well, it depends. You know, it depends. Cancer and well, anyway, medicines in America is a very expensive affair for the sick, and a very profit-making affair for the rich and those who own it. So it's very costly. But again, these areas of budgets, that's never been my problem. You know, I've worked in organizations all my life. I've never been a treasurer of any of them. So I'm usually away from the Treasury Department. It's being handled again by Dr. Bill Hall and others. They handle all those bills, whatever is needed. They take care of it so that I can continue in my last days to give my last energies completely to struggle.
Why do they do this for you, do you think?
Well, because I've sacrificed for the people. Once you sacrifice for the people sacrifice for you. They're bound to do it. They have no choice. I tell them I worked for you. And they know it's true.
And then what did you do for them?
I struggled for them. I continue to struggle for them, you know, and will continue to struggle for them, and continue to uphold the struggle with integrity for them, yeah.
Where do you want to live out your last days?
No, in Africa, no question about it. In Guinea, no question.
And what is it about Guinea that attracts you?
Well, you know, I first went to Guinea over 30 years ago, close to 30 years ago, and that I went there because it was the most revolutionary country in Africa. So it was the revolution that attracted me to Guinea. At that time, there were co-presidents, Kwame Nkrumah and Sekou Ture. And under these two geniuses of the African Revolution, I was able to get a thorough political education on the African Revolution, obviously, both in theory and practice. And Guinea has been the breathing ground, so it's the place I know best. It's the place I've spent most of my life, and it's the place I've done most of my organizing.
Where is it in Africa?
It's the west coast of Africa. It borders Sierra Leone, it borders Senegal, it borders Mali, it borders Liberia. It's in that area, and of course the Atlantic Ocean.
And do you want to be buried there?
Of course.
What do you have in the way of personal family left?
My mother, my sisters, and children, my sons.
How many children do you have?
I have 2 sons.
How old are they?
One is 17 and the other is 4.
And they live where?
One is in Guinea, the other one's with his mother somewhere here in Virginia.
In this speech again, and by the way, how important was that speech to you? It seemed like that you said an awful lot in that.
You know, it was organized by people, again, who were demonstrating love. Judy Richardson, Bill Strickland, Mike Thilwell, and they're within the academic circles there, and they were doing their very best to be of help, again, in trying to raise funds for the medical fund. And for us, as organizers, very rarely do we appear before white audiences of this type. We do it every once in a while just to test their fiber, their determination to maintain the status quo. And so this one represented a chance for us to tap them fairly hard and see what the response would be.
What's the reaction that you see from your eyes that when you're around whites?
From now, you mean?
Just now, right now. I mean,
no reaction.
I mean, how do they react to you? Is there a...
It depends. It depends. It's changing a lot. I'm sometimes very surprised. Sometimes I fight white males my age, and they look, and finally they decide, and they say, it must be him. Then they come, they sit there and say, are you? I said, yeah. And I said, let me tell you something. About 30 years ago, I was against you. You know, I want to kill you, you know. But I want to thank you because now, you know, you've helped me. I see, you know, that you were doing the right thing, you know. And so I get that, that reaction, which of course is reassuring and affirming. And, but I don't get too much hostility today. And the reason is because since the 1960s, whites cannot blame us for the problems that they've had. They know that we are not capable of bringing all the problems, whether or not there's prayer in the school or not. We have no control over that, and the general policies which they are opposing, we have no control over that. So I think that they begin to see more and more that, you know, we have no power and there's no need to waste time fighting us. So that hostility has been reduced.
C-SPAN's interview with Kwame Ture continues in a moment. Here's what he had to say about integration in 1966.
I want to make it crystal clear that when we say integration is irrelevant, that isn't to say that one is opposed to it. To do that is to commit the fallacy of the undistributed middle. Integration is irrelevant. I assume that we're integrated here. That's well and good. When I go out to catch a white cab driver, he's still going to pass me by. I don't know how that has helped. We're talking about racist institutions that exist in this country, not individuals. My friends are my own. They're not for public view. I believe in the right of free association. So we will just stop that right there. We do not organize black people to move and sit next to white people. That fight must be waged by white people. It has to be waged by white people, because when they deny me the right to live in their neighborhood, they lose. They miss me, and that's tough for them. And that for me to beg to get into that community is for me to dehumanize myself. And I shall not do that. I am a human being. I am black. I am equal. It is a problem of white people who do not see me as equal, and they have a problem to civilize themselves. That is their problem. Now, I want to touch then on the problem that Mr. Rustin raises about the lesser of two evils. It is about time that this country tells the political leaders that we do not vote for evil men, period. Mr. Rustin makes a fallacy when he says that Mississippi is a bastard state. She is not bastard. She is 100% American. And that is the assumption that SNCC has always moved on, that the South has not been some individual bunch of races, but that her power is strongly invested in Washington, D.C. I want to say then that what Mr. Rustin moves from is how to solve individual problems, and that's his biggest fallacy. He starts off with a freedom budget, which states that we're going to get money and give them to individuals because they're the reason why people are poor, as this country tells us, is because they're stupid, they're apathetic, they're lazy, they didn't go to school, they were born on the wrong side of the track, they had too many children, they went in the army too early. That's a lot of nonsense. Poverty is well calculated in this country. 2,000 families own and control 85% of the resources in this country. That's calculated poverty in this country. And that you don't find institutional calculated poverty on an individual basis. You organize to fight it on an institutional basis. And that's where we proceed from in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And that finally, I would just like to reiterate about the assumptions that what is good for this country is not good for black people. This country is racist from top to bottom, from right to left. Right! And for black people to become a part of that is for them to become, in fact, anti-black and to hate themselves. That is precisely why you have the frustration of the so-called black bourgeoisie. And that is precisely why you have the frustration of black people cutting and shooting each other on Friday nights inside the ghetto. The question of a black image is necessary. It is necessary. It is not sufficient. We recognize that in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. But in order to unite black people, you've got to get an image which they are proud of. And this country has made them ashamed of their image. And once they have got that, and once they begin to see themselves as a group and not as a bunch of individuals who can work in IBM or work in Standard Oil, who exploit South Africa and work on Wall Street and all that nonsense, once they begin to see themselves as a group, then they can wield group power, and that group power is going to be very, very effective, because I reiterate that if in fact you can control the politics of your community, you will control the economics. For example, if black people control Lowndes County, they've got the tax assessor, the tax collector, and the guns, the sheriff, they're going to raise the property tax. Since they don't own property in Lowndes County, white people either go sell or pay the taxes, and we can all go on welfare for a decent salary. And it becomes crystal clear to me that if you had black people who were responsive to Manhattan, where they control it, since they're 60%, they can then begin to change the economy of that country. And the pressure that black people will fight for will in fact motivate and move the rest of this country, because this country moves precisely because of the civil rights movement. That's why this country must stop it. Johnson must stop the civil rights movement because it is the biggest threat to his great society. But I want to point out one further thing. It is crystal clear to me that all the people who call for coalitions are coalescing with not one person who has spoken out against the war in Vietnam. That what is necessary in the black community is that we do develop an image of blackness which is healthy, and that secondly we begin to develop a political sophistication which comes from inside our community, because the external politics is built to contain us, always has been. It has been the history of this country. And that for the change of that we must develop those new politics, and that we are on the way of developing, because we are raising basic questions about the type of political system that runs this country. It is outdated. We need new forms. And that is what we're working for. And those forms, Mr. Rustin, once articulated, if you have what you call the good forces inside the racist community, will begin to speak to them. That is for them to speak to it, not to us. We will then continue inside the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee to build out of the ghettos of this country's communities where we have the power, and to begin to build political forces inside the different states which will force the two evil parties to stop becoming the lesser of evil parties and start readdressing itself to the problems that face this country.
Looking back, what worked? Violence versus nonviolence.
Both worked. You know, for me, the difference here must be clear between King and I. We started to talk about it before on precising the black power. But as we said, King took it as a principle. As a principle, being an honest man, which he was, King had to use it at all times under all conditions. For us, nonviolence is a tactic. If you go back and look at some of your documentation, you will see me in nonviolent act. I've been beaten, I've been sent to hospitals on nonviolent demonstrations, and I've never broken nonviolent demonstration. Only once in my life, and that was on the Mississippi March when the policeman pushed Dr. King. Have I ever broken a nonviolent discipline? So I accept it, you know, but if it's no longer working now, I'm not going to, like Dr. King, to become hostage to what I consider to be a tactic as a principle. I'll pick up guns.
How many times have you been arrested?
Yo, they asked me that the other day. I know they think they checked it something between 29 and 36, I think.
How many days or how many different jails have you been in?
Phew! I've seen jails in Ghana. I've seen, yeah, I've been arrested in Ghana. I've spent a night in jail in Ghana. I've been detained in France. I've been detained in Senegal. I've been expelled from Senegal. I've seen jails all over America. I've been expelled from Canada. So
How many jails in America?
Oh, I can't even count. But I've seen jails in New York. When I was a young student here, we went to, with the hospital workers here, Union 1149, I believe. We went to jail here in New York with union strikes, and of course in Maryland, and from there all the way down to Texas, I've seen jails.
What's the longest you've spent in jail?
Probably when I was young in Parchment Penitentiary in Mississippi in the 1961, the Freedom Rides, maybe two and a half months, 3 months.
And what happened there?
Torture every night. This is 1961. 1961.
How did you get to jail in Mississippi?
Freedom Rides. I got on the, you know, just breaking the law of segregation.
Was there a moment, though, and I remember reading somewhere where somebody called you boy and you didn't accept that?
Well, of course, this would be by 1964. Of course, now I was an experienced organizer with a lot of experience under my belt facing policemen. And this policeman was a rather racist. And in front of a whole group of people, you know, decided to insult us using me, you know. And he said, boy, I told you to go there. My name ain't Roy. You know. He said, what'd you say? I said, my name ain't Roy. He said, I said, Roy. I said, boy. I said, that's what I said. My name ain't Roy. You know, and what's your name? I said, Mr. Stokely Carmichael. So, oh, really? All right, you're arrested. We'll see you later. All right. And he arrested me and threw me in jail, and he had to do some work. And I'm almost sure that, of course, the SNCC comrades got me out of jail. And just they got me out of jail, his car was coming to the jail. But I was certain he was going to come back and try to torture me. And I was certain that I wasn't going to let him. I was going to fight him to death.
But get back to the violence, because in this speech at UMass, you talked about, first of all, you said that you met with the Crips and the Bloods out in Los Angeles. What was the reason for that?
To try and bring unity among them. We understand that these gangs are spurned by the CIA and the FBI to cause insecurity inside our community. And our job is to try and to bring down these hostilities, you know, and not only do that, but to show them that they need to be defending the community instead of bringing insecurity to the community. But we've been meeting with these gangs since the 1960s. If my memory serves me correctly, in Chicago, they were the Blackstone Rangers and the, I forgot the name of the other ones. Yeah, they had quite a few of them. But New York, wherever we go, we've always been meeting with them to try and to bring some sense of unity.
What's their reaction to you when they meet you?
Well, usually since they know me, but the Crips and the Bloods there, and last time they met me, they thought I was passé, you know, talking about, hey, we got to fight. Oh, that's the 60s. We're not fighting no more. So, but after Rodney King, they called back to, oh, we got to fight. I said, yes, you have to fight. Yeah.
What I wanted to ask you about was this little passage. You say, so I said, listen, you ain't got to do nothing difficult, just some little tactics like they do in Northern Ireland. Nothing big, you know. Get some gasoline, get some bottles, get some rags, you know. Molotov cocktail is the easiest thing in the world to do. Just pour gasoline in a bottle, put the rag in it, light the rag, throw it.
It's got to explode.
Anything it hits, it's got to explode against it. I said, when you got to see the biggest buildings you have in Los Angeles, put some snipers up there to keep the police and the army at bay. Nothing big, you know. And then you get some rubber tires and gather a lot. And when the police start coming, you spread out the tires and burn them. It keeps the police at bay, you know. Very simple things. What's that all about?
It was an attempt to show that as a people, we continue to resist against the enemy, but the resistance is spontaneous and unorganized. And we lived through the Watts Rebellion of 1965 to see the one in 1993. Was it here with Rodney King? It was 1993. And if you look, it's just like a repeat performance, you know. All of them, all the rebellions in this country, every last one of them has occurred over an act of police terrorism. All of them, without every last one of them, police terrorism. And they're always response to these police terrorism, but the response is spontaneous, unorganized. So I was saying, we're such an unorganized people, we don't even do simple things, you know, like they do in Northern Ireland. You know, it's not a big thing, you know, burn some rubber tires to stop cars from coming in. That's simple. You know, it costs nothing. But the point was, we don't even think of these simple little things like that, you know, Molotov cocktail, simple things. Because once the rebellion started, the snipers went up on the roofs, the Molotov cocktails were thrown, they looked for the tires to burn. So the emphasis was to say, let us move from spontaneity to organization, since we're going to do it anyway.
How far would you go with violence to bring about the revolution?
All the way. All the way.
What's that mean?
Whatever's necessary, whatever's necessary. In terms of carrying out to destroy the enemy, whatever's necessary.
What will, you say the revolution is coming, when will it come?
We don't know, that's the only trouble, but it's coming.
And what will happen when it comes?
Oh, when it comes, there's going to be a real experience of genuine equality and democracy. There's going to be a clear understanding of the needs that humanity must be at all times, under all conditions, be concerned about advancing humanity, and that all human beings who are involved in this aspect of life must make a contribution to advance humanity. And there's no question that this is what's going to happen.
What would you want the result to be from a revolution? How would we see it change in a country like the United States?
Well, here you would see about disappearance of the poor. You know, you would see a disappearance of inequalities. You would see a redirection of human energies away from profit towards serving humanity.
Since you first got active in the 60s, you hear a lot about the black middle class in this country doing well. What's your view of them?
They're not doing well at all, but they're doing better than those before them, but they're not doing well at all. And I think that's becoming clearer and clearer to them more than anybody else. The racism inside America, I don't know what made anyone think that it had disappeared, you know, but I think somehow, unfortunately, many of them probably did believe it had just disappeared, and when they're confronted with it, it unbalances them, to say the least.
Will the revolution be violent?
It depends. Depends upon those who unjustly hold power. And we've never seen them pass power, you know, without struggle, even though they've unjustly acquired it.
Is there a place in the world where socialism, communism, equality exists, and successfully?
All right. Let me answer your question in a philosophical manner and then come to it practically. The error that we make in judging systems is that we judge the adherents and not the principles. Not too long ago, a man came to tell me that socialism was dead, you know. So I told him, well, really? He said, yes. He said, you're still a socialist? I said, yes. He said, why? I said, I'm intelligent. He said, but it's dead, it's buried. Gorbachev, didn't you hear about it? I said, oh, that. I said, no. That's not death, that's just betrayal, you know. And he said, what do you mean? I said, socialism cannot die. He said, no, I saw it. These people in Russia, they gave it up. You know, I said, no, you cannot judge socialism by socialists. He said, what did you say? I said, you cannot judge socialism by socialists. He said, how must you judge it? I said, by its principles. It's only by its principles. He couldn't understand anything, so I asked him, do you judge Christianity by Christians? He took a breath here. I said, no. We judge Christianity by principles, the thought, deeds, words, and actions of Jesus Christ, peace be upon his name. That's how we judge Christianity, not even by Judas, not even by the Pope. It's judged by its principles. So socialism, even if it isn't working now, will not deter socialists from striving to arrive at it. I have been around American churches a lot in my life, and to be quite honest, it's difficult for me to find genuine Christians in these churches. But in no way does this diminish my enthusiasm for Christianity. And certainly as a good Christian, it is my responsibility to uphold the principles of Christianity amidst all of those who betray these principles. So even if there's no Christian church in the world, I do not believe that it cannot be. I know it will be. So I know socialism will come about. To more precisely answer your question, there are countries that have made a lot of headway. Of course, we can look at Cuba, right south of us here, and just leave that one as an example. Cuba still continues with all of its problems to occupy itself with the poor. America is the richest country in the world. Cuba is the poorest country in the world. But Cuba, everyone has free medicine, free medical attention, even though it's the poorest country in the world. So it's not a question of money, it's a question of determination and will to hammer out the injustices in societies. And that's why socialism will be inevitable, because humanity demands progress instinctively.
How religious are you?
Well, not in form, but certainly in spirituality. That is to say, I don't cling to one form. I live in Guinea. It's a Muslim country. I've been living there for years, and I grew up within a Christian background. I've been touched by Yoruba. Of course, I've studied all religions in the world. I've studied the works of the great Buddhist monks. I've studied Buddhism. I've studied Bahaism with the Bab. So I've studied all these religions. I must, because as an organizer interacting with people, I have to read these books which they say have affected them for so many, many centuries over such a vast area of the world. But certainly it's hard put to say that there's not a creator when one sees the perfect creation, you know, of the earth and even the human body itself, you know. So these are one of the problems I had as a young man with the theories of Marx and Leninism. That is, accepting atheism was very bitter for me to accept as a young man, and one of the reasons I hesitated giving all my energies to these philosophies.
Go back to the, you know, when you were a kid here in Bronx High School, you said you met Eugene Dennis, was that the right name? He was a communist, his father was an active communist. Can you remember when you saw something that offended you about equality back then, either then or when you went to college? I mean, when was the first instance? Or
it's difficult. Many people ask me this question, but it's rather difficult. For me, the consciousness I've gained has just been a result of a process rather than any special or specific events that I could point to and say, this triggered me, that triggered me, that triggered me.
Well, I guess we want to know whether it was you that you were offended by something somebody did to you, or what you saw happening to others.
Well, probably what I saw happening to others in the first instance. Yeah, probably what I saw happening to others in the first instance.
When did you first notice, when you were active in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, that the media was paying attention to you?
Well, the media attention actually started when I became chair of SNCC in a real serious form. That's the position I occupied, and that position called for public relationships for the organization. So that's the position I occupied. And as we said, they came along at a time when we were making more precise the struggle. and was going from freedom now to black power, or hell no, we won't go. And this was during my term as chairperson for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
Did you notice that if you did certain things that it would be effective in getting attention, you'd end up on the evening news?
No, we didn't do things to get press attention. If you look very carefully, you would see the relationship of SNCC and the press has never been very kind. If you go back to the early days, you would see we were always branded as communists, as radicals, as ones who wouldn't listen, and we didn't need the press in our work. The type of work we did was entirely different from that of Dr. Martin Luther King and his organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. They were mobilizing, doing demonstrations, we were organizing. So, matter of fact, they needed the press, we couldn't use the press. If they went to Birmingham to have demonstrations, then they wanted the press to come and cover it so people could see how brutal they were being treated. But if I went into a little town in Mississippi, Money, Mississippi, where Emmett Till was killed, and I was trying to organize that town, I couldn't go in and call a press conference and say, hey, here I am. You know, I had to go in quietly and build a base and try to stay as quiet as possible until the base was strong enough to be able to protect the people inside of it.
But during the Vietnam War, when you were, hell no, we won't go, were you getting a lot of attention then from the
Yes,
media?
again, we got a lot of attention from the media, but it's because of the positions we were taking, which the press thought would be positions once exposed to the people, that the people would say, oh, these people are crazy. But unfortunately, once again, it backfired.
You think they were deliberately covering you because they thought that
Yes.
people would say you were crazy?
Of course, they did. They made the error with Malcolm X also. After a while, and they caught themselves. They also made the error with us. But J. Edgar Hoover checked it. If you would look at the FBI files, he said, the press is making a mistake. No more coverage for them. He said it, and he corrected the error. You know, so he finally caught it, huh? We've been winning.
You've said on the record that you think the FBI may have given you this cancer.
I'm almost certain. I'm certain they did. I'm certain they did. The FBI have well advanced in German chemical warfare in this country. Extremely advanced. And there's no question that after the assassination of Martin Luther King, they themselves claimed in their intelligence magazines that they had to change the method of eliminating what they considered to be leaders. And of course, German chemical warfare is one of the best ways to do it.
But how would they have done it with you?
Any number of ways. I mean, we say just jokingly that if in the 1600s Indians could get smallpox from blankets by osmosis, they'd be able to give us cancer with laser beams today. And of course, America studies German chemical warfare.
Does the FBI, in your opinion, watch you now?
All the time.
How do you know?
Thanks to the right-white, they're having less time for us. They're having less time for us.
What do you mean by that?
Because the right-white, which were the stabilizing force and the one they could depend upon to attack us, is now attacking them, and attacking them seriously. You know, I see white people with guns in their hands saying, we want to blow off the heads of the FBI. Wow, you passing me, white man, come back here. You know, I'm supposed to be doing that. You know, so they've got their hands full there. They can't also devote their attention. In the 1960s, the African community was the major threat to what J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI considered to be the status quo in the country. But today we're not the major threat any longer. These other forces are.
How do you know the FBI? What sense do you have? What evidence do you have that they're following you now?
Oh, of course I would be following them if I were them. And they were me. Because they know I'm not going to change. We have a program that we've been running since 1974 called Smash the FBI and the CIA. And our party's been doing just about alone, but they know if our party's alone, we're holding up the banner, we're going to smash them. Yeah.
But are they tapping your phones?
Of course, no, not today. They're more sophisticated. They don't need to do that, you know. I used to laugh in the old days in the South. The old sheriff used to come with a big boomerang mic, you know, and sit down in the old sheriff's car and hold it out the window to record the mass meetings. They don't need to do that today. It's satellites. You know, there's just that much advanced. Anytime you see, I remember once, years ago, I was passing through Germany at the airport, and they had all these gadgets, you know. You could put something in your telephone, go all around the world, and pick it up in your bedroom. And the man next to me said, you see that? I said, if they're giving this to the public, could you imagine what they have? Could you imagine what they have? The intelligence services of the world today can just about follow anybody they want to on camera 24 hours a day. Of that we're certain.
One of the things you mentioned when you talk about part of your tactics is that you repeat, and repeat your philosophy. And recently, in Pat Buchanan's new book, he says that the road to success requires brute repetition. Now, are we seeing a pattern here from both the left and the right, and that brute repetition is the success?
Well, I wouldn't use the word brute, but certainly repetition is a means of embedding into the mind certain aspects of life that you would like to, no question about it.
What do you repeat most often?
The need for revolution.
Your slogan. Ready for
the revolution.
And the answer to the phone's here that way.
Ready for the revolution. We're always ready for it. Revolution is our only solution. And since we're aware of that, we must do everything possible to create the conditions to help bring it about. But revolution is permanent now. It's not an event. That's why we say it's a transforming event. If you want to see the best transformation process in this country, you should look at Malcolm X. And you can see how what revolutionary can transform. I mean, Malcolm X was a pimp who transformed to be a genuine revolutionary. So revolution does not just transform the conditions, but also transform the individual to strive to be a better individual, to be more useful to humanity, and more service to the people.
Who's doing the most effective job of representing the poor today in the United States?
Well, they're not really being properly represented today. Most of their grassroots organizations have been destroyed by the FBI. But these organizations are coming back, and we're looking for them to build a base of almost irreversibility, if you will. That is to say that once they form as organizations, they will not be pushed back as in the past. So that since the middle 70s, every and anybody has been representing them. And you know, the poor people are so easily to be fooled. You know, if you would, the easiest people to fool are the poor and the powerless. Just go and sit down in their little cabin and have a dinner with them. They'll vote for you for the rest of your life. They're very easy to be fooled, but they're becoming more conscious.
I remember, I'm your age, I remember back in the 60s that one of the things that you did was speak a lot. And the slogans that you're talking about, hell no, we won't go, and Black Power, all came through in those speeches. Did you do anything as a speaker purposely to keep people's attention?
No, not at all.
Did you train to be a speaker?
Not at all, not at all. I traced my early years of speaking abilities to 125th Street here in Harlem on the corner. You had something unique. I've only seen one other place in the world, and that's in Hyde Park, is it, in London. You know, the street ladder speaker. At 125th Street, when I was a young man, 15, 16, in my teenage years, they used to have these speakers who would get up on 125th Street on a ladder and just speak about Africa and about revolution, about nationalism, about the need for struggle. And they'd be on those corners, and they attracted my attention. And there was a bookstore there called Michel's Bookstore, which I spent a lot of my time in, and these attracted my attention. My second grain of speaking came from Baptist preachers in the South. Yeah, now both of these speakers had terrible tasks. I mean, they had burdens. In Harlem, they would try to speak to these Africans here in the 1950s about Africa. Try and catch their attention. They're trying to go party, and this man talking about Africa. So you had to be very sharp. And Harlem, of course, is most indisciplined. So once you will get up on a ladder, you're inviting all the indisciplined elements to attack you. So they had to be very sharp. And in the South, here were sharecroppers who pick cotton, you know, from sunup to sundown, you know, were very tired. On Saturday nights, they went out to enjoy themselves. And then Sunday morning, the preacher had to make enough noise, make them happy enough to give them a lecture to put money for gas in his Cadillac. So he had a lot of work to do. And I got my two strains of early speaking from my early speaking from these two strains, the nationalist speaker in Harlem and the Delta preacher in the South. Of course, later on under Kwame Nkrumah and certainly under Sekou Ture, I would develop more and more revolutionary speaking patterns.
Can you remember back in the 60s the biggest audience you ever spoke to? Or can you remember a speech that had a particular impact on the country?
I can't think. Maybe Berkeley. Maybe the Berkeley speech in terms of the relationship between white liberals and Africans. We spelled it out properly clearly there at the Berkeley speech. I remember that might be 1966, 1967.
Did you write your speeches?
No. SNCC would write some of them when we had to present positions, and then the SNCC people would outline the positions, and from the positions outlined by SNCC, I would develop the speeches.
Did you ever notice a certain length of a speech that mattered more than others? Could you talk too long?
No, not at all. Not at all. No, I'm not a long-winded speaker.
What about the famous, and I say famous because it's written about several times, Carmichael grin? Do you know you're doing that?
No, it's really natural. It's natural. It's really natural.
Who are you more like there, your mother or your father?
My father. My father.
And what, your father died in
61, 62.
And your mother's still alive, living in Florida.
Kicking hard, just like all the women kill off the men. I tell you, you kill off our men, and then you all enjoy life. Kill my poor father, and now you're enjoying life.
And what does your family that still lives here, the four sisters and all, think of what you're doing?
Well, my sisters have always given me full support in every aspect of my life, for which I'm very grateful. And even if disagreeing with me politically, they've never let that affect our relationships.
And what do you want people to remember about Stokely Carmichael of Kwame Ture?
Just another human being, just another brother on the corner, doing more or less what they all do, maintaining the struggle, upholding integrity.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Ready for revolution.
For more information, contact the Kwame Ture Medical Fund in care of the Black United Fund of Illinois, 2302 East 71st Street, Chicago, Illinois, 60649.
American Perspectives continues in a